The gym went quiet when the big man laughed at Bumpy's name. Chalk dust hanging like a challenge, fists tightening. Everyone certain violence would speak first in a Harlem room built for breaking men. The gym had been there longer than most of the men inside it. Brick walls darkened by years of sweat. Windows too high to see the street, just enough light to remind you of time passing. The air smelled of chalk, iron, and old patience. This was not a place for speeches. It was a place that listened. Heavy bags swayed gently even when no one touched them, as if the room remembered every punch ever thrown. Ropes creaked. Leather groaned. The floorboards had learned where to bend and where not to. Men came here to be tested, but only fools thought the test was strength. That morning, the big man arrived early. 300 pounds of sculpted certainty. Shoulders stretched his shirt like it resented him. His arms were thick in a way that demanded attention, veins standing up as if they wanted credit. He moved loud without trying, boots heavy, breath confident, eyes already measuring who mattered. Wasn't from Harlem. Everyone knew that before he spoke. Outsiders always brought noise with them. The kind that thought volume created gravity. He dropped his bag without care, metal buckles clanging. A few heads turned. No one said anything. The regulars kept wrapping hands, skipping rope, working bags. That silence bothered him more than cheers ever could have. A man that size expected reaction. He stretched slowly, making sure he took space, rolled his neck, threw a few shadow punches that cut air like threats. Each movement said the same thing. I am here to be seen. Someone laughed softly near the lockers. Not at him, at something else entirely. The sound landed wrong. The big man looked around. This all you got? He said, voice thick with amusement. I've seen tougher rooms in Jersey. No one answered. That was the rule here. Harlem didn't rush to correct strangers. Harlem watched. Harlem waited. The trainer, an old man with hands like rope and eyes like closed doors, didn't look up from taping. A kid's knuckles. He had seen men like this come and go. Loud entrances. Short lessons. The big man scoffed, rolling his shoulders. Thought this place was supposed to be something. He said it louder this time. Louder meant braver, where he came from. Still nothing. The gym door opened again. It wasn't dramatic. No wind. No pause. Just a man stepping inside like he belonged to the room before the room belonged to him. Hat low. Coat clean but worn in the right places. Shoes polished, not flashy. He didn't scan the gym. He didn't need to. Bumpy Johnson removed his gloves slowly, setting them on a bench like they had weight beyond leather. Men noticed without staring. Conversations didn't stop. They simply adjusted, the way water does when something solid enters it. The big man looked him over. Slim, calm, older than most in the room. No rush in his walk. No tension in his shoulders. The kind of man you'd underestimate if you'd never paid for that mistake before. Bumpy nodded once to the trainer. Respect, given and returned without ceremony. Then he moved toward the lockers, passing the big man without a glance. That stung. The big man smiled, but it wasn't friendly. Hey, he said, you the manager or something? Bumpy didn't turn. He placed his hat down, smoothed his coat sleeve. Simple motions, controlled, as if time itself waited for him. Someone near the ring stopped. Skipping rope. The big man stepped closer. Too close. I asked you something. Bumpy finally looked at him, not up, not down, straight through. The look wasn't hard. It didn't need to be. It was settled. I heard you, Bumpy said calmly. His voice didn't rise. It didn't challenge. It rested. The big man chuckled. Then you know I'm looking for a real workout. Not this church basement business. A few men shifted their weight. This wasn't about workouts anymore. Words had crossed into something else. Bumpy studied him for a moment, like a doctor deciding whether something was worth cutting out. "You're standing in a room that keeps its own order," he said. "Best learn that before you hurt yourself." That made the big man laugh. A big rolling sound meant to remind everyone of his size. "You threatening me?" Bumpy shook his head slightly. No, the simplicity of it confused him. Then what? The big man pressed. "You got a problem?" Bumpy turned fully now. The gym felt smaller, not because of tension, because of focus. "No," Bumpy said again, "but you do." The words settled into the space between them, clean, unrushed, certain. The big man squared his shoulders, muscles tightening as if they answered to insult. "You don't look like much." That was the mistake, not the insult. The assumption dot around them, the gym held its breath. Men who had seen knives put away and wars avoided knew the signs. This wasn't chaos building. This was order preparing to correct itself. Bumpy stepped closer, closing the distance without aggression. Close enough to be heard without shouting. Close enough that size mattered less than balance. "This room don't care what you lift," Bumpy said quietly. "It only remembers how you behave." 5 seconds hadn't passed yet, but everything had already begun. The gym didn't erupt. After the words landed, it never did. Harlem places like this didn't survive by feeding noise. They survived by understanding consequence. Bumpy stepped back first, not retreating. Resetting the air. He picked up a towel, wiped his hands slowly, and moved toward the edge of the room as if nothing had happened. That was the lesson most men missed. Power didn't need to linger where it had already been felt. The big man stayed frozen for a beat too long. That silence pressed on him harder than fists ever could. He rolled his neck again, louder this time, flexing his hands, trying to pull the room back toward him. But the room had already chosen its center. Bumpy Johnson was tying his gloves. The trainer finally spoke, his voice thin but steady. "Rules are simple," he said without looking up. "No grandstanding, no disrespect. You want rounds, you earn them." The big man snorted. "Earn them from who?" Bumpy didn't answer. He stepped into the ring, testing the ropes with a light pull, feeling how much give they had left in them. Everything Bumpy did came from memory. He remembered how floors creaked when they were weak, how ropes felt before they snapped, how men behaved right before they embarrassed themselves. This gym wasn't just a place to fight. It was where Harlem settled things quietly. Disputes that didn't need police. Conflicts that didn't need blood in the street. It existed because Bumpy insisted it exist. Years ago, before the mirrors cracked and the paint peeled, Bumpy had sat with preachers, shop owners, numbers runners, and men who lived between names. He told them Harlem needed spaces where anger could be burned off without burning everything else down. He funded it, protected it, made sure no one brought knives through the door, made sure boys learned discipline before damage, made sure outsiders understood this wasn't neutral ground. The big man didn't know any of that. All he saw was a lean man lacing gloves like ritual mattered more than muscle. "You?" he said, disbelief leaking into his tone. "You're gonna show me?" Bumpy looked at him calmly. "If you're here to learn." That word learn scratched the big man's pride raw. "I didn't come for lessons," he said. "I came to see what Harlem had." Bumpy nodded. "Then watch." He gestured toward the ring, not inviting, not ordering. Allowing. That distinction mattered. The big man climbed through the ropes with force, making sure they shook. He bounced once, twice, like a performer warming an audience that didn't. Clap dot around them, men gathered. No cheering. No bets called out loud, just attention. Harlem attention was quiet and total. Bumpy stepped inside and closed the ropes behind him. He rolled his shoulders once. No stretching. No show. His body already knew what to do. A kid barely old enough to shave leaned toward the trainer. "That him?" he whispered. The trainer didn't answer. He didn't need to. The men who had been there long enough knew. And the ones who didn't were about to. Bumpy raised his gloves, not high, not low, right where they belonged. His feet found the floor naturally, weight balanced, knees soft. He wasn't here to prove anything. He was here to correct a misunderstanding. The big man circled, eyes scanning for weakness. He saw age. He saw lean muscle where he expected bulk. He saw calm and mistook it for caution. "You sure you don't want someone your size?" he asked, grin wide. Bumpy's voice stayed even. "You're the one who asked." That drew a few quiet smiles. The bell didn't ring. It never did for moments like this. The trainer simply stepped back. Harlem understood when time started. Bumpy moved first, not forward, but aside. A shift just enough to make the big man adjust. That adjustment mattered. It told Bumpy everything he needed to know. Balance wasn't just physical. It was mental. And this man leaned too hard on confidence. The big man threw a testing jab. Heavy. Fast. It cut air where Bumpy had been a second earlier. Bumpy didn't counter. He let it pass. That restraint unsettled the big man more than a punch would have. He threw another. And another. Each one missed by inches. Not luck. Placement. The room watched how Bumpy conserved energy, how he measured distance, how he refused to rush the moment. Harlem men learned patience early, from waiting on checks that came late, from promises that took years, from knowing the fastest move wasn't always the right one. The big man exhaled sharply, irritation showing now. "You gonna do something?" Bumpy stepped inside his reach for the first time, close enough that the big man felt his presence more than saw. I already am," Bumpy said. That was when the crowd felt it shift, not excitement. Recognition. This wasn't a fight spiraling toward chaos. This was an order reclaiming its space. The big man drew back his arm, loading power. Too much power. Bumpy saw it before it happened. He always did. 5 seconds hadn't come yet, but Harlem already knew how this would end because they had seen this before. Different men. Different bodies. Same mistake, underestimating the quiet ones, underestimating the man who carried Harlem's balance without ever needing to. Announce it. And in that ring, with chalk dust hanging and breath tightening, Bumpy Johnson waited not for violence, but for inevitability to arrive on its own schedule. The mistake wasn't the punch. It was the audience. The big man drew his arm back like he was pulling history behind it. His shoulder turned. His hips followed late. Power without timing. A move built to impress mirrors, not men who watched closely. Bumpy saw it all before it finished forming. He didn't flinch. He didn't brace. He shifted his weight half a step, nothing dramatic, and let the punch pass close enough for the POs. Air to brush his sleeve. Close enough to remind the big man how much he'd missed. That miss echoed louder than contact. The room tightened, not with fear. With clarity. The big man reset, breath heavier now, pride scraped. He laughed again, but this time it came sharp, forced. "You think you're slick?" he said. "You ain't even trying." Bumpy's eyes stayed on his center line, not his hands. "I don't waste effort," he replied. That answer stung worse than mockery. It stripped the big man of spectacle, reduced him to a problem being solved quietly. He lunged forward again, faster this time. A combination meant to overwhelm. 2 quick punches, then a third thrown with frustration behind it. The crowd heard the gloves cut air like tearing cloth. Bumpy stepped inside the arc of the second punch. Not back. Never back. Inside was where control lived. His forearm rose just enough to redirect. His shoulder brushed the big man's chest, not a strike, a reminder of space. The third punch died before it finished. The big man stumbled a half step, surprised. Shock flashed across his face, not pain. Confusion. "You touched me," he said, like that meant something. Bumpy nodded once. "You're learning." A low murmur moved through the gym. Not cheers, recognition. This was no longer private. This was instruction, delivered in front of witnesses who mattered. The big man's face darkened. He looked past Bumpy now, scanning the faces around the ring. Men he wanted to impress. Men he suddenly realized weren't impressed at all. Someone in the back spoke quietly. "Watch his feet." Another voice answered, "Too late." The big man heard it. Outsiders always did at the wrong moment. His jaw tightened. This wasn't just about Bumpy anymore. This was about respect slipping through his fingers in real time. He rushed, not attacked rushed. The difference was everything. He charged forward, trying to use mass like authority, trying to turn the ring into a collision instead of a conversation. He wanted to impose his will, end the exchange, reclaim control before it vanished completely. That was when Bumpy decided. It was time, not to finish. Not yet. To clarify, Bumpy planted his lead foot and turned his shoulder slightly. His movement was compact, efficient, learned long before gyms like this had mirrors. He caught the big man's momentum, guided it, and stepped aside. The big man crashed forward into nothing. His foot tangled with the mat. His balance betrayed him. He windmilled once, barely staying upright. Laughter didn't come. That would have been mercy. What came instead was silence, the kind that burns. Bumpy turned to face him again, already composed. "You fight loud," he said evenly. "That's why you lose your footing." The big man straightened, chest heaving now. Sweat beaded at his temples. For the first time, his size looked heavy instead of powerful. "You ain't beat me," he snapped. Bumpy nodded. "I didn't need to." That landed harder than any blow, because everyone watching understood what it meant. This wasn't a contest Bumpy needed to win. It was one the big man couldn't afford to lose. The trainer stepped closer to the ring. "That's enough," he said, firm, but the big man shook his head. "No, I ain't done." His voice cracked just enough to reveal truth. This had crossed the line from gym business to pride business. And pride demanded a public resolution. Bumpy looked at the trainer, then around the room, at the men who kept this place alive, at the boys who watched, learning what strength really looked like. "Give him his moment," Bumpy said quietly. The trainer hesitated, then stepped back. The big man exhaled hard, like a bull preparing to charge again. He raised his gloves higher, now desperate to protect himself from embarrassment more than harm. "This time," he said, "I'm not missing." Bumpy didn't answer. He simply raised his gloves slightly and waited. The big man attacked again, sloppier now, anger breaking. Rhythm. His punches came wide, powerful, uncontrolled. Each one carried the weight of needing to prove something fast. Bumpy blocked the first without effort, redirected the second, slipped the third, then he stepped in, not with speed, with certainty. One hand pressed lightly against the big man's elbow, collapsing the punch before it extended. The other hand touched his shoulder, not striking, guiding. Bumpy turned his hips just enough. The big man felt his balance leave him. Before he understood why, his feet tangled. His weight shifted wrong. The world tilted. He fell, not violently, not dramatically, but completely. 300 pounds hit the mat in a single, humiliating truth. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The gym stayed silent as the big man lay there, staring up at the ceiling, breath knocked out of him by something that hadn't even looked like a fight. Bumpy stood over him, not looming, waiting, After a moment, the big man rolled onto his side, coughing, face red not from pain, but from understanding what had just happened in front of witnesses he could never erase. Bumpy offered a hand. That was the moment everyone remembered. Not the fall. The hand. The big man hesitated. Pride wrestled with reality. Then, slowly, he took it. Bumpy helped him up without strain, without commentary. "You're strong," Bumpy said calmly, "just not settled." The big man nodded, eyes down now. "I didn't know." Bumpy released his hand. "That's why you came." The trainer stepped forward. "We done," he said. Bumpy removed his gloves and stepped out of the ring. The gym exhaled collectively, like a held breath finally released, but the story wasn't over, because 5 seconds still waited, and everyone in that room knew the real lesson hadn't been delivered yet. The mistake came after the lesson. That was always how it happened. The big man stood there, sweat cooling on his skin, the ring suddenly feeling smaller than it had minutes ago. The eyes around him weren't mocking. They weren't impressed either. They were finished with him. And that, more than anything, scraped his pride raw. Bumpy had already stepped through the ropes. That should have been the end. In Harlem, when a man with authority disengaged, the moment was closed. The door didn't stay open for arguments. Respect meant knowing when the air had settled, and letting it stay that way. But the big man wasn't from Harlem. He wiped his face with his forearm, jaw tightening as he watched Bumpy walk away. The hand that had helped him up now felt heavier than the fall itself. Gratitude mixed with humiliation, and humiliation always wanted to speak. "You think that's it?" he said. The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. The gym heard them anyway. Bumpy stopped. Not immediately. A beat passed. Then another. He turned slowly, like a man deciding whether something deserved his attention. The trainer felt it before anyone else. His shoulders stiffened. "Don't," he warned quietly. The big man ignored him. "You didn't knock me out," he said. "You didn't prove nothing." That was when the room changed. Not sharply, not violently. Just enough for everyone to understand this had crossed into something final. Bumpy faced him fully now. His expression hadn't hardened. That was the frightening part. It had settled. "I proved what needed proving," Bumpy said. To this room, the big man shook his head. "I ain't asking the room." That sentence sealed it. A few men stepped back instinctively. They knew what came next wasn't about teaching. It was about boundary. Bumpy removed his coat and folded it carefully over the bench. The gesture was slow, deliberate, respectful. He wasn't preparing for a fight. He was preparing to close something properly. He stepped back into the ring. The ropes whispered as they parted for him. The big man's chest rose and fell faster now. He hadn't expected this. Not really. Part of him hoped Bumpy would walk away, preserve dignity, leave the ending soft. But Harlem didn't reward soft endings when disrespect insisted on a final word. "You want 5 seconds?" Bumpy asked quietly. The big man frowned. 5 seconds for what? Bumpy raised his gloves. Just slightly. For you to understand, the trainer didn't object this time. He stepped back, eyes steady, knowing this was no longer his room to govern. The gym went still. No bags moving. No ropes creaking. Even the building seemed to lean in. The big man nodded once, jaw clenched. "All right." He came forward again, but this time slower, cautious. That alone told Bumpy everything. The fear had arrived late, but it had arrived. The first second passed with nothing but footwork. Bumpy circled just enough to draw the man off center. Second, the big man threw a jab. Controlled, careful. Bumpy slipped it effortlessly. Third second, Bumpy stepped inside, his shoulder brushing past the man's chest. Not a strike. a positioning. The big man felt his balance tilt. Fourth second, Bumpy's hand came up, palm open, pressing against the man's sternum with precise force. Not enough to hurt. Enough to move. The fifth second was the only one anyone remembered. Bumpy shifted his weight and turned. The motion was small, efficient, a movement learned in places far less forgiving than this gym. He redirected the big man's own mass downward and forward, 300 pounds. Went where Bumpy decided. The body hit the mat hard this time, hard enough to rattle the ropes, hard enough to silence any remaining doubt. The sound echoed once, then nothing. The big man lay still, stunned, not unconscious, but emptied. The fight gone out of him like air leaving a tire. Bumpy stood over him for a moment, not triumphantly, not angrily, just present. He waited until the big man moved, until he saw breath return to rhythm. Then he stepped back. That was 5 seconds, Bumpy said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look around for approval. He simply stated a fact. The big man pushed himself up slowly, every movement careful now. His face had changed. Not fear. Acceptance. I didn't know, he said again, quieter this time. Bumpy nodded. Now you do. He turned and stepped out of the ring, retrieving his coat, slipping it on as if nothing unusual had happened. Because for him, it hadn't. The trainer approached the big man and held out a towel. Sit, he said. Not unkindly. The big man obeyed. Bumpy walked toward the door, stopping once, hand on the frame. He didn't look back. Strength without respect, he said calmly, is just noise. Then he left. The door closed behind him without a sound, and the gym, once again, remembered how order was restored not through chaos, not through cruelty, but through 5 seconds of absolute control. The gym didn't rush to fill the silence after Bumpy left. It never did. Men stayed where they were, letting the moment settle into the walls the same way sweat did, slow, permanent, earned. The big man sat on the bench with a towel draped over his shoulders, staring at the floor like it might explain something he hadn't understood before walking through that door. Nobody mocked him. That was important. Harlem didn't kick men when they learned. It only corrected those who refused to. The trainer finally broke the quiet. You all right? He asked. The big man nodded. Yeah. His voice was different now. Lower. Measured. I'm all right. He wasn't lying. Something had been stripped away, but something else had been given in its place. A man could walk out of a room lighter even after hitting the ground hard. It depended on what he left behind. Around him, the gym returned to life. Bags swung again. Gloves slapped leather. Ropes turned rhythm back into routine. But something had changed, and everyone felt it. A kid asked softly, "That always happen?" An older man answered without looking at him, "Only once." That was how legends worked here. Not repeated. Remembered. Outside, Harlem moved the way it always had. Stores opened. Radios played low. Women leaned out of windows to shake rugs. Men argued about numbers and ball games and business. The neighborhood didn't need to be told what happened inside that gym. It would know soon enough. Stories traveled fast when they were short. 5 seconds. That was all anyone said. Not who. Through what punch. Not how the body fell. Just the time it took for a misunderstanding to end. Bumpy Johnson didn't spread the story. He never did. He walked 3 blocks, stopped at a fruit stand, nodded to the owner, bought an apple, and continued on his way. Authority didn't follow him like noise. It preceded him like understanding. Men tipped hats as he passed. Some didn't look up at all. Respect wasn't always visible. It didn't need to be. That evening, the big man sat alone in his rented room, ice melting in a bowl beside him. His body ached in places pride had masked earlier. But pain wasn't what kept him awake. It was the moment before the fall, the calm, the certainty. He replayed it over and over, trying to find where he could have changed it. He never could. That bothered him more than losing ever had, because it meant the outcome hadn't been a matter of chance. It had been decided the moment he laughed at a name he didn't understand. The next morning, he returned to the gym early. This time, he knocked before entering. The trainer looked up, surprised. "You back?" The big man nodded. "If that's all right." The trainer studied him for a moment, then gestured him in. "Wrap your hands. No speeches. No apologies needed." He trained quietly that day. Listened more than he spoke. Watched footwork. Asked questions when appropriate. When Bumpy's name came up, he didn't react. He just nodded. Harlem noticed. Weeks passed. The story settled into something solid. It wasn't exaggerated. It didn't grow claws or extra details. It stayed clean. That was how Harlem preferred its lessons. Bumpy Johnson didn't return to the gym for a while. He didn't need to. The room carried him in his absence. That was legacy when presence wasn't required for influence to hold. Young men learned what strength looked like without shouting. Older men nodded when the story came up, satisfied it had been handled correctly. No police, no ambulances, no funerals. Order preserved. That mattered, because Harlem had enough noise pressing in from outside. Enough people misunderstanding it, testing it, trying to bend it into something profitable or broken. Bumpy understood that real power was knowing when to stop a fire before it spread. 5 seconds saved months of retaliation. 5 seconds kept the peace. Years later, when Bumpy's name was spoken in rooms far from that gym, the story still surfaced. Always short, always the same. A big man tested him. What happened? 5 seconds. And that was enough, because the truth didn't need decoration. Bumpy Johnson's power never came from how hard he hit. It came from when he chose to, from knowing that community wasn't built by dominating it, but by protecting its balance. By teaching lessons that didn't demand blood to be remembered. That gym stayed open long after some of the men inside it didn't. The walls held the memory. The floor remembered the weight. The ropes remembered the correction. And Harlem remembered the man who kept order not by ruling loudly but by moving with restraint. That was the legacy. Not the fall, not the body, but the understanding that when Bumpy Johnson stood still, everything else adjusted around him. Time moved on the way it always did in Harlem, slow on the surface, heavy underneath. The gym kept its doors open. New faces came in. Old ones faded out. Paint peeled. Bags were replaced, but the rules didn't change. They never did. Men still lowered their voices when they stepped inside. Still watched their footing. Still understood that the room wasn't neutral ground. It belonged to a history that measured behavior more than strength. Bumpy Johnson didn't need to return for that understanding to hold. His absence became its own presence. People spoke of him the way you speak of something solid. That doesn't move, brick, iron, ground, not with excitement. With certainty. When his name came up, conversations adjusted themselves. Not out of fear. Out of memory. The big man stayed in Harlem longer than he planned. He trained. He learned. He stopped announcing himself. When new fighters came in loud, he didn't correct them with force. He corrected them with quiet, with a look, with a word placed carefully. Not like that, he'd say. And most listened. Those who didn't learn the same way he had without spectacle. Years later, when he was asked why he never talked about that day, he answered simply, because it wasn't about me. That was the lesson Bumpy left behind. Without ever naming it, power wasn't something you displayed. It was something you carried responsibly, so others didn't have to. Harlem changed. It always did. New money, new pressures. New men who thought size and speed were the same as control. But certain things held their shape, names, stories, moments that refused to fade because they were built correctly. 5 seconds became shorthand for restraint, for inevitability, for the idea that violence wasn't the point resolution was. Bumpy Johnson understood that legacy wasn't about how many people feared you. It was about how many slept peacefully because you existed. How many disputes ended early. How many boys grew up learning that real authority didn't shout. When Bumpy passed, Harlem didn't erupt. It paused. Men stood in doorways. Hats came off. Radios went quiet for a moment longer than usual. The neighborhood didn't need ceremonies to mark the loss. It felt the weight shift, but the balance held, because legacy, when built right, doesn't collapse with the man. It stays in rooms like that, Jim, in habits passed down quietly, in stories told short and clean. A 300-pound man tested him. What happened? 5 seconds. And the meaning stayed intact. That was Bumpy Johnson's gift to Harlem, not dominance, not fear, but a standard. One that reminded everyone that strength without respect was just noise, and respect earned quietly could hold a community together long after the man himself was gone. The gym door still closed without a sound, and Harlem remembered.